Hey, Toronto, welcome to How's the Market podcast, joined by some familiar faces here. Everybody say hi and wave.
Hello, hello. Good to see you, everyone.
Hey.
Today, we're going to review an article by the CBC covering increased funding towards the Landlord Tenant Board that the government's announced. Who wants to recap?
Kate, would you like to lead the way?
Sure. The article mentioned that they were going to be increasing 40 virtual adjudicators. Virtual only, not in person. The province has also committed $4.5 million in 2022 and then an additional $1.4 million in December for the Landlord Tenant Board to help get through the backlog that they're currently experiencing.
So the big question is, will the additional almost $6 million help that backlog move along? I think doing the virtual thing with the 40 adjudicators is going to be a more efficient way of doing it. I think it will help expedite it, but that's a pretty big backlog to get through.
Yeah, 80,000 applications are currently waiting.
Yeah, they get about 80,000 applications per year to the Landlord Tenant Board. And the problem is it's a system that's been in trouble for a long time. This isn't new. So 2018 was the start of a lot of these issues. It's when we started to see a backlog. That, of course, coincided with when they made the rental cap legislation. Properties that were occupied for the first time after November 2018 did not have rent controls, and any property before then did. So you essentially created two different markets, two different rental markets. And that obviously had a large impact on the number of applications, people looking to increase rental rates. And as a result, you have this backlog, you have a system that just doesn't work anymore. And then COVID happened and they completely stopped all hearings, which is understandable. You're in an unprecedented global pandemic.
I believe they also froze rent increases.
Rent increases were frozen. Yeah, great point.
But
Kate.
not mortgages.
Not mortgages, no, but that was part of it. So you already had a system that was struggling. Then you add in, they completely shut down the Landlord Tenant Board. No rent increases were allowed. No evictions were allowed. So you essentially had this rental market that was frozen and just building up with problems. And some of it, arguably, yes, you need people to have homes when they're forced to stay at home. It makes sense. But then at the same time, there was no plan coming out of it for how do we handle the backlog? How do we handle problems that really happened even before COVID, right? You had people with applications in long before the pandemic was declared. And now all of a sudden you're waiting years to have your day at the hearing, which just leads to problems when a system doesn't work properly.
And Andrea actually she was talking about a really interesting question earlier before we started filming. Andrea.
So we were talking about possibly even creating some housing issues and housing shortages, because a lot of people are actually scared to rent out their homes. If you've got people that, for example, are leaving on a 2-year away from home, or possibly like a work exchange or something. They think they're possibly coming back. They want to hold on to their homes. They're scared to rent out their homes because then coming back, it may be difficult to get somebody out. We know there's processes in place, but it's pretty interesting.
I find the shock and awe always reaches the papers or the news, right? So you hear about the tenant that is growing marijuana or has a meth lab or hasn't been paid for 4 years, and the landlord's now living in their car for whatever reason. And then you hear about the horrible landlord that turns off the heat and does all that sort of stuff. I find the portion of the rental market that actually is very small. We want to create a fair system I guess the government wants to create a fair system to deal with it so everyone has their day in court, and that make sure that it is a fair system for both parties. Because it's right now, I feel like they're on both sides, people trying to game the system. And one of the motivations for this is to not only just clear up the backlog, but to go after the rent eviction. So the landlord coming in and saying, I'm going to renovate it, kick them out. And I think it's fair for both sides. And hopefully there's a more balanced system where we can find something that works.
And because when the system's broken, it doesn't work for anyone. And that's the problem right now. To your point, Dave, you have people that know how to professionally work the system. There's a way to do it. There are the unscrupulous landlords. That's the minority, as we've already discussed. Many are great landlords, but there's that percentage, that small portion of the landlords that just go, okay, the tenant is not agreeing to a rent increase, or I feel like it's way under market value. Here comes the rent eviction, and it's very difficult to stop that process. Or I'm going to put a family member in the home for a period of time. And then on the flip side, you get the professional tenants that go from property to property to property. They pay 1 or 2 months, then they stop, and they know it's going to be months before they get evicted. But what the problem is, the collateral damage are the thousands, the tens of thousands of people who this is their home, raising their kids in these houses. They go to the school. They're part of the they work at a local business, they're part of a church, whatever it may be. Like that is their home. It's their safest space. And then you also have landlords who have uncertainty. Like, as to your point, Andrew, if I go on a sabbatical for a year or two and I just say, you know what, it'd be great to not just have my home sitting. I mean, I can do a great thing, rent it out, have a family, use it while I'm gone. The fear is I'm going to come back, they're going to overhold, they're not going to return the property to me. And then I'm at an Airbnb or living in my aunt and uncle's basement for 6 to 8 months while I wait to get a hearing.
If you have kids, like where do you put your kids? Or if they've destroyed the property, how do you go about remediating that when, you know, it's going to take you 8 months to a year to sit with the landlord tenant board and hope that something even comes out of it?
Yeah, because even by the time justice is served, quote unquote, it's been so long, like the damage is done with it.
I feel like at this point, like it's such a long wait that it's almost discouraging for people. Is this really worth my time? For a lot of situations, a lot of people are probably just washing their hands and saying, hey, I will never rent, or I will never rent out my property again. And we already have such a shortage of rental units in Toronto. It's not a great thing when you're discouraging people from putting their home on the market because of uncertainty.
When you look at the core, the pandemic has created such a seesaw yo-yo effect where we saw a mass exodus from the core when work from home became what everyone is doing. And then everyone's, you know, they're moving back to their parents' place, or they're moving out of the city, or they're buying a place outside of the city. And now as we see people coming back to the office, higher demand. So it's so easy for when the demand slides one way or another for one side to try and game the system. And now it's like, okay, you know, where rental prices are now, I think a one bedroom's almost over $2,500 for the average one bedroom.
Yeah, like the year over year increase has been exponential.
So
right? We're talking like over almost 22% year over year increase to the average one bedroom rental. And think of the pendulum swing that we had. Remember when COVID started, like you could not give away a condo rental essentially.
That's what I mean by yo-yo. I think pendulum's probably a good way to do it, because it does come back.
It came back. You had people getting, you know, one bedroom condos for 2015, 2016 prices all of a sudden, right? They were 1,000 to 1,500 below what the landlord had previously been getting, and the landlord struggled through it. And now it's like
3 months,
all these incentives. And now the shoe is on the proverbial other foot of, okay, I've got 15 applicants lining up to get this place, and the tenants are,
and that's what's so hard for tenants as well, right? You can have these people who, like, it's so invasive, the amount of paperwork that's required. And you can be amazing on paper and have been a good tenant your whole life, and you make a great income and you take care of your property. And at some point, it doesn't matter because there's such a housing shortage. And some landlords are so scorned by previous tenants that they group a whole bunch of tenants as a group instead of taking them like one at a time. Or again, you're going up against 15 other people paying a year, 2 years rent up front. How do you compete?
Exactly. And it just goes to, once again, the supply metrics. Like we have not built anywhere near enough purpose-built rentals for this province. It's nowhere close. So we've become a province and the city entirely reliant on either large REITs and companies and rental companies or mom and pop landlords that are buying new construction condos, that are converting their basements into rentals. And so the problem is, to your point, when they lose faith in that system, it's like, why would I do this? Yes, it'd be great to get some rental income to support my retirement.
But at what point is it no longer worth it?
Is it no longer worth it? And once again, the other thing that I think we forget a lot of the time, and I always remind people when they're saying, oh, I'm going to get into an investment property, is this is a business. Like it is a business. And I own rental properties. I always try to approach it from a client relation standpoint of, hey, my tenants are my clients. I want to make sure give them a great home at a fair price, and it's a really wonderful experience. But a lot of people don't want to be in the landlord business. You do have to deal with things. You have to deal with capital expenditures, with repairs. You have to deal with just the problems that come with owning a home.
Yeah.
And on top of that, if you're not a paralegal or a lawyer, you then have to navigate all the residential tenancies laws, and it can be very difficult and overwhelming at times. What am I allowed or not allowed to do?
And I think it's really important to have that backup plan as well. Have that extra savings. What happens if my tenant is a month or 2 months late on rent? What happens if I end up having to sell? Having those backup conversations with your professionals, with your lawyer, with your real estate agent, with your accountant. I think we'd be surprised at how many people don't do that enough. Don't take the proper precautions and just waltz into buying an investment property.
Agreed. Yeah. I don't know who to credit. Someone called it the Swan Fund, the Sleep at Night Fund, but like I always call it my emergency fund. So anytime I'm looking at purchasing a prospective investment property, what is 1 year of expenses? Some people might say I'm crazy. That's way too much, but I'd rather have a year of runway
Yeah.
where I can really foster anything that happens and sleep very well and sleep very comfortably.
Yeah.
And especially now that you can throw it in like a GIC and get 4 or 4.5% on it and then take it when you need it. But I'd rather do that than be it where you're saying, where oh my God, if the tenant doesn't pay, because then no one wins in that situation either. The house goes into a foreclosure, a power of sale, the tenant's out, the property's gone.
Or you have to sell it as a tenanted property and probably get way below market value.
Right. And it's challenging and that's invasive as well, right?
Andrea and I were chatting about that before, is what happens to the bank or the lender who now has to sell a property that, there's a problematic tenant there who's not paying, like,
Or what happens to the tenant?
Or what happens
and
to
what
a
happens
tenant,
to
yeah.
the tenant too. And that just gets messy.
And it's difficult because we don't really have a one in, one out system, right? Like we're trying to build this rental stock in the city, but once again, we have huge numbers of in-migration, immigration. So you're getting this massive influx. Last year, they're talking about we added 1 million Canadians, and you're going to get a significant portion of that coming to the GTA. They understandably want to purchase homes. A lot of people do. It's still the Canadian dream. As much as it gets debated, the majority of Canadians want to purchase a home. And if it's a tenanted property, it's an investment property, I understand. A family sees it, it's perfect, they purchase it, that's now gone. That tenanted property is out of the rental stock, right? And if it's a duplex or if it's something where it's main floor in the basement, you've now taken 2 units out. So the math doesn't work either. It's not a great situation.
Let's wave the magic wand. This fixes everything, and the backlog becomes, maybe it becomes a month or two. Whatever's more efficient for it. What's going to be the results on both sides? How do you see that helping tenants?
I can speak to it. I think tenants they'll feel a sense of security, right? Because it's one of those things, like let's say the roof leaks and there's black mold forming, or there's a problem with the windows, the heating's not working. If I know as a tenant, if I can have that conversation with my landlord and it doesn't go well, or the landlord's hesitant, I can go to the landlord tenant board and have this problem fixed. I can then plan on, okay, the repairs are going to need to be done. I'm going to have a safe, secure home to have my family in. So I think it makes them feel better about, yes, I'm willing to pay the market rent. I know I'm going to get a fair interaction with my landlord. I am going to be protected as a tenant. I'm not going to have to worry about a wrongful or a false eviction. And I know the property will be looked and maintained up to a habitable standard. I think that's important.
What I'm hoping for is that maybe it'll actually help put more rental properties available on the market, and people that have that fear, that concern, and the hesitant to market their property as a rental will go ahead and take the jump, because they'll feel better about being able to resolve things too in a fair time.
I think it will also encourage people to, whether they're adding a basement apartment, a garden suite, or laneway suite, feel more comfortable doing so and be able to navigate the system and find a good tenant. Again, 95%, 99% of the time we deal with this stuff, there's never an issue. When there is an issue, let's make sure we can resolve it and everybody's happy.
Well, everyone's hesitant when there's issues. When they hear, like, it's all in the headlines. Every time you talk about housing in Ontario, it's the first thing that comes up is the Toronto rental market. And like Andrea said, like, I'm hoping that, because there's probably a lot of people out there who own multiple properties, whether they bought a condo for their kid going to school, whether they bought it as an investment to hold property. And if they've got the money, it might not even be worth the risk for them to ever put it out on the rental market. They pay a tax because they're leaving it vacant. They pay a small tax. They don't pay hydro or anything like that, or a very low cost. They let it sit empty. They let it accumulate value, which I think the last 10 years, a lot of people have probably been doing, buying new condos, buying assignments, and just letting it sit there. And it's not worth the risk to have someone potentially come in and ruin your property or not pay rent and then have to spend 8 to 10 months dealing with the landlord board. So hopefully maybe some of those properties will come on the market. People will feel more comfortable. And it's like, hey, you can make a small profit while doing this as well.
And then, too, I think it also eliminates the unfortunate nomadic nature of life as a tenant in Toronto. I think when I started renting here, thankfully I had some stability, but every year or two, it was a new place. It was just the way it was. Okay, I need it for my cousins coming. They're going to live in the city. So, okay, that place is gone. And then I got a new job. Okay, I got to go find somewhere closer because the commute's too far. And so hopefully it gets that sense too, where a tenant can say, you know what, I can actually lay down roots in this community. I can feel part of it. I can feel secure, because I know we deal with families looking for properties. This isn't the stereotype, which I think, once again, when we talk about the stereotypes, a lot of the stereotypes of tenants are like, it's a single person, like young guy's going to trash the place, that sort of deal, right? University kids going to go crazy, group of students. But like, these are families, like 2 working parents, 2 or 3 kids, like they want that sense of security. Like hey, I want to put my kids in the school. I want to know that I'm not going to get my kids integrated into a classroom, have them make all these friends, and then have to rip them out and go across town to somewhere new. Like it's traumatic for being a father of 2 kids. Like you
And it's
want
a
that
huge
stability.
expense. It's a ton of time.
Right, the
It's a lot of
move,
work.
yeah,
Like
right.
it's not an easy thing.
No, yeah, sorry.
It's expensive too. I don't think pizza and beer pays for your friends to move more than once a decade, right? Like it's
Yeah, especially in the winter months.
Especially in the winter, right? And it can be entirely disruptive. And depending on what time of the year it is too, right? There might not be any rentals. You can look at the high point for rentals, understandably, is the summer, right? Universities and everyone's renewing for next year, but it's difficult. We have this mass influx of immigration. We have 100,000 plus students coming into the city, right? And then think of all the industries that come seasonally as well. We're building out this amazing entertainment and film industry. Like all those people who are coming in need a place to stay while they're working on set for 3 or 4 months, right? Another market we don't really talk about in Toronto is there is a seasonal market, right? And in other communities, if it's an agriculture or farming community, you have a lot of work that comes for harvest season, but there are these influxes of people.
Even a lot of bartenders in the summer. I used to, when I was in university, I worked seasonally along the water, and you had a job for 3 months, and then after that you were let go, and we'll see you next summer.
Yeah, exactly. Coming from Alberta, it was always the Australians working on the ski hills. That was always, every ski hill you go to, it's someone with an Australian accent greeting you, but that was the way it was. It was seasonal work. They come for the winter, then they're going back home for their summer. But I've banged on this drum as long as I can, as loud as I can. It's just, if the system doesn't work, it doesn't work for anyone. And that's a big problem. And I hope we get through this backlog, because now there's just a sense of hopelessness. People hope there's not going to be a problem. Because if you are living in a 2-unit building, let's say there's a main floor and then someone's in the basement, like you are sharing living space. There's going to be cooking odors. There's going to be noise issues. There's going to be a lot of interaction between those two people. And if it doesn't work and there's a legitimate problem, you now have to look at it like, oh my gosh, I have to share this space with this person for potentially 8 months in a very negative and hostile relationship.
And that's
before
your
it gets
safe
resolved. And that's
space, right?
supposed to be
Where
your
you come
home,
to relax
right?
after work. It's
Yeah.
where you entertain. It's where you have your family. It's where you live your life.
And it doesn't work. I'm hopeful that I'm unfortunately not optimistic that 40 virtual adjudicators are going to make a huge dent in this, but it is something that if we want to fix the rental market crisis we're facing, it's one of the most important things we have to address, because having a level, fair playing field for landlords and tenants alike will help instill confidence in the system, and it will encourage more people to become investors, to become landlords.
I think I'll put on my rose-colored glasses and say there's 80,000.
Yeah, they get about 80,000 applications per year. Like it's a huge number.
Is that per year, or there's how many in the backlog right now?
I believe that's how many they
believe it's
get per
per
year.
year.
That's roughly what they get. Like
They
it's a
haven't
large
released, as far as I understand, stats of where they're currently at.
I wonder how many of those get resolved, because it's just.
And not only that, but resolved on time, right? Like I know they have a target of, I believe it's 3 to 4 months is their target time. And a lot of them don't. Like we say, we're waiting 5, 6, 7, 8 months, right? And to very detrimental costs. It can have huge financial implications, it can have mental and physical health implications.
I wonder if some of those people even still live in Toronto anymore.
Well, that's just it. Unfortunately, then what it becomes is if people don't feel the system is working for them, if you're a tenant and you're in a totally untenable situation with your landlord, what are your options?
Yeah.
Grin and bear it and live in a very awful circumstance, or you leave.
Yeah.
And you have to give up your home, and then you're thrown back into the Lord of the Flies rental market we have here in Toronto. And that's difficult. Right?
You better hope you have good credit and good employment.
And even if you do, sometimes you just have to get lucky, right?
Absolutely.
Like you've seen it, like working for landlords, you get applications and it's 10 like AAA picture perfect tenants. And you go, okay, I can only have 1 unit for these 10
Flip
people.
a die and
Right.
see
Yeah.
what
And you
happens.
just hope, right? And then that's not even to say like how difficult it is for, I know we have agents in our office who work with like Ukrainian refugees coming, people who are being sponsored to come to Canada, who have no credit history. They're being maybe sponsored by like a community group or a church or something to be here. It's even more difficult, right? It compounds those problems. And same with students. Universities aren't building residences. They've washed their hands and said, hey, we'll collect the tuition. We love international students. Where are you going to house them? Well, that's the market and they'll figure it out.
Well, that's
right?
also when you have your largest university and college institutions in downtown Toronto. Like, where are they going to find the
Where do
money?
you
Where are
build,
they going
right?
to build them? And why? Why
Yeah.
would they?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not going to add more classroom spaces. It's not a very fiscally prudent way to essentially make money at the university, but that's a whole other conversation given my background, so I won't go too far down that role. But yeah, it is just you have this massive influx and there's no end in sight. And I think it's been shown that cities that have a large rental pool tend to just be more affordable in general.
Yeah.
The resale market's more affordable. There's more opportunities. At Montreal, they have a huge rental pool compared to Toronto, right? Comparatively speaking. And even they have challenges with affordability, despite their large number of rental properties.
So I think the 40 extra adjudicators is a step in the right direction, but we'll see what the results are, and hopefully there's additional funding coming.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I would agree. And once again, it's figuring out a way to make the system more efficient and to almost like the pre-screening. It's just how do you get through this backlog? The way it's being done, even if you add more bodies, just it's not going to work. It can't continue. Right?
Yeah, it's there's definitely a problem there. The system's broken, but I've always tried to bring solutions to problems, but I don't know how to resolve this one. So.
No, it is in need of an overhaul, but for the time being, it's get through the backlog, I think, as quick as possible, get back to baseline, but that's going to take a lot of time, effort, and goodwill.
Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see what happens with this one.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Dave. Thank
Thanks
you,
for
everyone,
having
for
us.
joining.
Thanks for having us.